we need an economic system where a Bill Gates or Koch brothers is impossible. And it goes as follows. Not much frustrates me, but our economic system does. Within its apparent brilliance lies a malignancy that will ultimately destroy our country and eventually the entire planet as we know it. To be clear, there is no free market, and the fallacy that capitalism is the most efficient distribution of resources, aka our economic system, is a farce. Like with religion, we have all been led to believe that our economic system is divine, or the best we can expect. What is true is that it's the best of the few who decide to use it in order to take advantage of everyone else. Now, what I did then is I brought in Bill Gates and I brought in the Koch brothers. So I said, ironically, most people do not set out to harm others' financial well-being at all, which is true. Nobody really wants to do that. I don't think people are inherently evil or anything of that nature. They are just following the legal path set forth by our economic system. Technology giant Bill Gates used the tenets of our system to build wealth. The Koch brothers inherited theirs. Gates did not grow up poor, but he was not a blue blood. The manner in which they acquired their wealth likely influenced these billionaires. The guy who knew what it takes to make a buck for himself, despite our flawed economic model, is much more compassionate than the ones who had silver spoons in their mouths. So as you can see, some have accused me of somehow equating the two of these guys together. I am not. Bill Gates is a good guy who has been following the tenets of our current economic model. You can't ask anybody who's doing something legal not to do it. The Koch brothers, by the same token, they're following the rules, but in the process, the ideological tenets that they are pushing are detrimental, evil, and much worse. Anyhow, continuing. The guy who, but the reality is, these two characters share more in common than not. What I wanted to show there is the commonality of having excesses, the commonality of having that inordinate amount of money that give you almost full total control of whatever you want to do. But the reality is these two characters share more in common than not. They both wield power to control politicians, and with that, policies that affect us all undemocratically. It is the benevolent pseudo-dictator versus the evil dictator. You know, where I come from is a country called Panama. And in this country, we had a dictator called we had a dictator called Omar Torrijos Herrera. Omar Torrijos, a lot of people didn't like him because he was a dictator. Yes, he was a dictator. But I've always called him the benevolent dictator. Now, he's a guy who signed the Panama Canal Treaty with Carter, that gave the canal back to Panama in 1903. He was one of the good guys. He went into parts of the country that nobody went into, and he paved roads, and he created water plants, and he created dams, and built dams, and all these other things to help folks out, to help people that never got help before. In other words, I'm equating him with Senor Gates. Then, of course, you have Ferdinand Marcos, the evil dictator of the Philippines, or I could use some others. We can go with, I don't want to say Idi Amin Dada because I don't know enough of the internal mechanism of the politics, but you go with another dictator who just kill folk, or if their ideology is not implemented. That is what we have. So for those folks who thought the idea was to equate the Koch brothers somehow with Bill Gates, that wasn't the issue. The issue was, welcome aboard Juan Garza. The issue was to show that there is a commonality just from being a billionaire, and my contention is no American deserves to be a billionaire, but we'll talk about that later on. Our indoctrination about how things are and should be has left the masses somewhat unaware of a harsh reality. These guys' excess wealth is our surplus labor and earnings denied. In effect, we gave them what shouldn't be all theirs. And, you know, some people complain about the way I said that statement. I stand by it, and I'd love to explain it later on. Bill Gates intrinsically realizes after the fact that he must return his accumulated wealth. He will never say it that way, but the man knows math, and he has a heart. The Koch brothers believe they are entitled to their net worth, even though their only virtue was being born a Koch. Both the Koch brothers and Bill Gates give away a lot of money, but their aims differ. The Koch brothers are ideological while Gates is practical. Money capital is power, and we should not have an economic system where anyone can accumulate an infinite stream of capital. I don't care what you think you brought to this country, what you think you brought to this economy. Nobody is entitled to infinite capital. There's no magical thing. An economy is human made. We determine as a society how capital is allocated, and to believe that somehow intrinsically, because you had a great idea, like many of us have had, many of us have had ideas that some have capitalized on. I can tell you a story with the shopping cart that I was going to write in the 90s that I couldn't write the software because Amazon went ahead and did what's called, they patented the one-note technology, one-click technology, something that we find asinine in the form of, how can you patent something that is pretty darn common? But that is a kind of economic model we have that is driven and kept intact by our government. Anyhow, continuing, the Koch brothers believe they are entitled to their net worth, even though their only virtue was being born a Koch. Both the Koch brothers and Bill Gates give away a lot of money. The Koch brothers are ideological, while Gates is practical. More money is more capital. Or rather, more money capital is power. And we should not have an economic system where anyone can accumulate an infinite stream of capital. That accumulation is wealth denied others, not because of worth, but because of a flawed economic model. A flawed economic model. Before I continue, folks, please do remember to share these shows. That is how we actually promote getting the message out. First, no one person can provide the service required to accumulate the sums that billionaires have. In other words, absent everybody else, absent the current people that are living on this planet today, absent the learning that we got progressively from our forefathers, progressively from people before them, progressively from that, all the sum total of that knowledge base is what a few capitalize on today and then say it's mine. That's not the case, folks. We have to change the way we think. We have to change the way we have been indoctrinated. Okay? They are dependent on others, and they are dependent on others to receive a profit way above those who work to create the additional capital one can only classify as legal theft. Think of it as a few notches above slavery. All right? Think about it as a few notches above slavery. If Bezos is the richest person on the planet with several $billion, if he has that inordinate amount of employees that are not partaking, that he only could get that $1 billion by having all those employees work for the contract they're working for, sell what they sell, the stock appreciate, and that's how he got income. What happens to all the people in this country, because we're talking about America right now, that are a part of what created the infrastructure to allow him to attain the capital or the monies that the company made? And then how does that all suddenly become his? We've been taught to think, people. We've been indoctrinated in this country to somehow believe that you just do something, and because you had a particular idea and you capitalize on that idea, that somehow that idea is all yours, and any capital raised from that idea is all yours. It is ingrained in our psyche, and unless we remove that, we'll all be screwed, because the science behind, or the math behind that thinking process gives you what we have today, which is income inequality, wealth disparity, and it's all begin because of the structure we have. It's not magical. It is not that we need to make a tweak or a little tweak here or there. It is that we have a problem in the system proper. That is the issue. You know, Remember, the genesis of Bill Gates' wealth was not his product and thus not his intellect. He went to a little company, I believe it's in Seattle or somewhere else, and bought a product, then licensed the product, and in his ingeniousness, not selling the product that he bought outright to IBM and holding on the rights so that he could further capitalize on it, is a genius in what he did. Okay, so I mean, that was great. And not only that, for the technology, for what happens in this country, it is great. It is great that we have that he made his money that way. It was legal. But morally, if you change your morality to believe in equity of worth, then when I mean equity of worth, I'm talking about how then can he really feel good taking all that, because what he built was upon the backs of others. Well, because he's a good guy, he's given back the vast majority of what he took. He's given it back. But don't ask the Koch brothers to do that, because they won't. Different thought processes is what we're talking about, folks. And because we have learned somehow that when we create something that we are the sole individual, being individualistic, that we did it, it gives us that additional impetus to believe that it is ours, it is mine, I created it. Now, as I mentioned in my little talk that I gave yesterday before I came on to, I gave a little quick video last night because I saw all the responses to the Daily Kos, and I just did a little 15-minute video on that. And the reason I did the video, I wasn't going to do the show necessarily today, but afterwards I said, let's go ahead and cover the same subject. But the idea is we have to change. We have to change our thought process. Many wealthy people, all right, let me continue right here. Moreover, as his company grew, meaning Bill Gates' company, his wealth increased due to the legalized gambling that is the stock market, an instrument few can or should partake in given its divergence from reality. And that's a fact. Many wealthy people and people aspiring to be wealthy tend to believe they are entitled to the manner in which they created their wealth. They tend to think they have more worth than those who manufacture things, grow food, fix cars, design items, and much more. They think that they're superior. Their thought process of being the one who thought, well, if I went ahead and created this widget and then have everybody else work the widget, I make all the excess profit from these slaves that are implemented my thought process. We have to get away from that thought process, that thinking that you have one idea and other people help you build that idea, that somehow you are the one entitled to all of that. Folks, please do remember to share all these shows. As people come and go, we want to make sure you know to share these shows. This is how we are going to get the real message across. Okay, now, they tend to think that they have more worth than those who manufacture things. They would even disparage the person who calculated that it's more efficient to accept welfare after thinking about their economic maximization. These same people use terms like make my money work for me or work smarter, not harder. They don't see the similarity in their positions. Everyone tries to maximize their personal economy given the economic model they are presently in, or the economic model they are presently in the aggregate. In the aggregate, it turns out the wealthy are the most significant takers of all. And I'm willing and able at any time to go ahead and make that point or justify that point as well. The world needs a new economic model. That's the reality. It requires one that puts humanity over capital, one that rewards those who produce, and one that prevents the profits of financial instruments vis-a-vis derivatives, stock options, etc., that contribute nothing towards society but allow the lazy to find ways to make money irrespective of the economic conditions. The new model should work seamlessly with government or we the people to decide what parts of the economy should be private and what parts public. Note, I said, parts of the economy, public, parts private. Just like it is now. but just a different flavor, a different form. We should base it on humanity first. We don't base it on what makes better business sense for particular companies. We don't do that. We make it make economic sense to the masses, to humanity first. After all, the only reason to have a society, the only reason for society is to make life better for humans. No other reason. It's not to make life better for a few, it's to make life better for us all. For starters, everything required for our basic needs should be public. Banking, healthcare, utilities, energy, and mass transportation. Now, I got some comments that said, well, why didn't you include food and clothing? Well, the food and clothing is what you can, if you can't afford it somehow, because I also believe in basic income, that will be covered within the basic income, of course. I don't remember if it's really called a basic income or what, but it's something to that nature. Most everything else should be private. The previous statements may sound radical to many because we have been brainwashed into believing that maximal privatization is best for society or more efficient. Reality has proven something completely different. More so than not, it has created ever-growing income and wealth disparity, with those least deserving continuing to profit from our flawed economic model. And some people said, well, the world got really ahead. Big skyscrapers, big bridges, big liners, freight liners, all these things were created by capitalism. Absolutely so, you know. But here's my kicker. Had we never had capitalism, would a lot of this stuff occur? It depends on the economic model that we decided to have. Folks, please do remember to share these shows. It's very important that you share, and you share widely, because that is how we're going to get these new concepts, or not new concepts, but these concepts adapted and listened to and heard from a whole lot of different people, instead of having to be indoctrinated by those who have really caused us to do the things like voting against our own interests. So folks have asked, does that mean that after, what occurs then is that we wouldn't have had these skyscrapers, these bridges, these great big things that capitalism has put together? First of all, it doesn't mean that at all. But as well, you could be right. It could be that we wouldn't have those big steamships. It could be that we didn't have those big bridges. It could be that we didn't have a whole lot of those big things, because it could be that society didn't ask for them to be built. It could be that society didn't necessarily want that. But even more importantly, you are telling me to build all these things required us to have just a few of us getting wealthy, and everybody else just being standard or poor. So therefore, building all the skyscrapers and all of that, to what end? To what end? Does it make life better for the average American citizen? Does it make life any easier? Does it make you work less? So my point is, if you take a look at some of the arguments that some would make, is like, well, we wouldn't have all this technology, or we wouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. Maybe, maybe not. But if the answer is also maybe not, so what? Because as when I've spoken about capitalism before, as somebody else told me once, they said, wait a minute, a lot of those buildings, the skyscraper and these mass buildings and mass constructions and mass edifices to capitalism, most of the people who built them, most of the people who partake of this society are unable to use it. 210, I'm coming to you next, are unable to partake of the riches that this country has created. So, to what end, I ask again? So whether or not all these great things that were built would have been built, I don't know that really matters. Anyhow, continuing for starters, everything, the previous statements may sound radical. I did that already. So let's continue. Reality has proven something completely different. More so than not, it has created ever-growing income and wealth disparity with those least deserving continue to profit from our flawed economic model. We must open our minds to the possibility of a more just economic model and ignore the fear accompanying the false accusation that wanting one is tantamount to being a communist. Stop fearing people calling you a communist or a socialist, because that is a showstopper. They know that if they use those two words because of the how America is, the first thing you're going to do is freeze up, clam up, and shut up. Don't. Because that's not what you're advocating. You're advocating an economic model that works. They say, well, no other model has worked and only capitalism. First of all, let me remind all of you folks that one of the reasons there are no other models is that we ensure there are no other models in any great that is overly successful or gets out there ahead of the game. When and some of the folks are going to not going to understand this because again of the indoctrination they have on South America or people on the left. When Hugo Chavez tried to establish Los Estados Unidos de Sudamérica, I think it was called something. I think they were called Los Estados Unidos Bolivianos, the Bolivian the United States of the Bolivian United States or something of that nature. I think it was that he called it. It was. They did everything possible to prevent those countries in the South from uniting because it would have been a hell of a block put together, and it would have been put those countries together. They would have not necessarily rivaled the United States of America from an economic standpoint, but put together, they could not simply be bullied around, and the United States didn't want that. At that time, high price of oil was high, and Hugo Chavez could leverage a whole lot of that with these other countries. He did. I think he loaned quite a bit of money to Argentina, if I remember correctly, and some other countries, and maybe even Brazil, but I'm not sure at all. Anyway, to close out, we must open our minds to the possibility of a more just economic model and ignore the fear accompanying the false accusation that wanting one is tantamount to being a communist. Once we discard the notion that the economic model under which we live is the best or only one possible, it opens the possibility. It opens the possibility of transitioning into that one that works for everyone. And that's all that we want. We're not looking to have a whole bunch of names for a new economic model. We're not looking for, hurting anybody. We're just looking for an economic model that works for everybody, where everyone can survive. I have a postscript underneath here where I said, while I had some positive reactions to the article, it generated a huge backlash from a sect within the Democratic Party that seems unable to unleash themselves from the tenets of neoliberalism, including a form of capitalism that is decimating its constituents and most Americans for that matter. Some resorted to implying that I am anti-innovation. I'm not. I am anti-exploit. What I am is anti-exploitation. Look, I voluntarily gave up my profitable software company to dedicate myself to political blogging and activism, but I do believe in free enterprise, not unfettered capitalism. I explained some of this to the listeners who sent to a listener who sent me an email when I objected to Trump's tax cut filter and pilfer, and I have that link directly in my blog.